Hi, everyone. I'm Wesley Hill, and I am one of the ministers of congregational care at Brentwood United Methodist Church. And I would like to welcome you to our series called Resiliency and Hope. And tonight we are going to be talking about anger. We have designed this time and this space for conversations that are surrounding mental wellness. And our hope is that you will be able to identify some of the things that might hit home for you. And in the midst of those struggles and those things that hit a little closer to home, be able to find strategies, strength, and hope that will help carry you through those. And before we start talking with our therapists about anger, I'd like to open us with prayer. Oh God, we thank you for joining us here tonight. As complex as they are, tonight we thank you for the gift of emotions. I thank you for the comfortable and the familiar emotions and those that even stretch us sometimes. You created each one of us in your amazing image. And you've also made us so different with unique ways to see the world. You have given us different ways to communicate and express our thoughts and our feelings and ideas. And you've placed all of us on this planet together to do life side by side. Father, I admit that there are some times being together works well and other times it's more of a challenge. But no matter how different, no matter the challenges we face, we know that we are loved by you. As we seek to learn more tonight about our own anger and the anger of those around us, I pray that you would guide our conversation and help us all to listen to what you would have us to hear and find the hope that only you can offer. Amen. All right. Like last time, we have our three therapists here. They're the ones that practice counseling in the building back behind our church. And we have Dr. John Fike, who is our counseling psychologist. He specializes in individual and couples therapy for adults, adolescent individual therapy, and both executive and life coaching. We have Dr. Jim Wilburn, and he is a clinical psychologist who specializes in individual, family, and group psychotherapy with children and adolescents. And we have Stacy Jagger, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in restoring the connection between children and their parents. Thank y'all for coming back for round 4.
Thanks for having us.
Must mean that you like it in order to come back again.
Yeah, where would we go?
I don't know.
What else
But
do
I'm glad that y'all
we're all stuck in our houses?
Well, before we get started talking about anger, I want to remind everybody that you all can submit questions and we will be answering those live here in a little bit. So I'll be asking you or kind of directing you to that space so that we can have those questions and answer them for you too. Also, if you have not taken the time yet or don't know about it, this might be your first time, this, like I said, is our fourth one. And on our website, bumc.net, we have the previous three. So if you would like to go back in and join that part of the conversation, these tend to build on each other. They're good standalones, but they also tend to build on each other. So if you'd like to go back and look at those, I'd encourage you to do that. I tend to go back and review them before each one of these so I can pick up those nuggets I didn't get while we were talking before.
I have trouble like watching myself. Does that mean, Wesley, when you look at it and you watch yourself, you don't go, ee?
Oh yeah, I do that. I do that. I look at myself and go, oh, ooh, I did that. Which means I'm going to go back next month and look at this and do this. So last time, one of the questions that stuck with me, it was close to the end of the time. And the question we had last time brought up the topic of anger. And I wanted to expand on that just a little bit more. The question that we had, if you didn't watch it or didn't listen to it, was really about how depression can mask as anger. But I really kind of want to think about anger itself. I'll go ahead and admit, because we know how we are with confessions here, I'm going to go ahead and confess that anger is not my go-to emotion. It just isn't. It's not one that I'm particularly comfortable with in myself. But
Lucky you.
what's that?
Lucky you.
Yeah. Well, but there is a but here. And that but here is about an hour ago, my children reminded me that I still have that in me. So I'm ready for us to talk about this.
Those kids, they are so wonderful for helping us know ourselves better.
Aren't they? So when we're thinking about these things, there has been a whole lot that we have seen over the last year that's been angry. I think we see it on TV. I think we see it in newspapers. We hear about it. I'm starting to be a little more angry and get a little more frustrated, and my fuse is a whole lot shorter. So I'm glad that y'all are here tonight to talk to me about what I can do to not be so angry.
I'm kind of feeling glad we're not in the same room with you talking about how much I'm struggling with that. It's like, so.
So as we're looking at that, if I'm thinking back through the last year, I'm kind of wondering, no, I'm not kind of wondering, I am wondering, how much has the pandemic, and as we've gotten through to this place where we're almost at a year, are we seeing more anger now? Or have we been seeing the same amount of anger? We're just more aware of it.
You know, I wondered that, okay? And I started digging in. So I could not find a study for the US. I found one for Great Britain, though.
What are they doing in Great Britain?
Yeah, kind of similar, kind of different. But they said 56% of people there said that anger and arguments had been a bigger part of their life in the last year. 56%. At 22% said they'd had the experience of confronting someone in the pandemic about masks. 14% said that they had been confronted. It tended to track more toward younger people. Financial problems, you know, if you were experiencing financial problems, that was related to how often you experienced anger. And of course, another factor was your perceived risk for getting sick in the pandemic. So, and of course, the last factor was people who tended to get angry more frequently also spent more time on social media.
Yeah.
That's a funny thing that tends to go through all of our conversations, isn't it?
Well, part of what, as I was listening to John talk about the changes in the stats, the percentages and frequencies during the pandemic, one of the things that strikes me is that we actually, as therapists, have this be a part of the time that we spend with folks outside of the pandemic, in the sense that we're more likely to get families or individuals who are experiencing fairly significant stress. The difference in part is that the stress tends to be this smaller group or subsection of folks, or this individual person or this individual family. And what we're dealing with now is that the whole society is stressed. And it's absolutely the case that as you start being stressed and it extends across periods of time, there's all kinds of stuff that starts to occur, both in terms of effects on your physiology, but also in terms of your frustration tolerance, in terms of the lens or the filter that you start to use, that you use to interpret things in the world. Those things start to shift as we get stressed, as we get fearful, as we feel threatened in various ways. So that the interesting thing to me about this is we could have had this discussion, us therapists could have had this discussion with you just in and of itself, because we're more likely to see folks who are experiencing that. We just have a whole culture where that's happening too.
So not only are you seeing it in your four walls there counseling people, but it's outside the four walls, and there's a lot more of it there.
And it's completely predictable, just from the level of stress that came from the complete disruption of everything at kind of every level, financial and subsistence level aspects of things, and the economy of the families, and the kinds of difficulties that are happening in America because of the election cycle, and the disease, the effects of the virus, and the loss that's going in with that, and the fear that's going with that, and so all of that was inevitable about the level of stress. And now it's been going on a year. We're approaching a year when things began to their discussions began about shutting everything down. And that's a long time. There's few people, except for folks who've been in extraordinary cultural or civil circumstances, like a country at war, or being involved in being placed in some kind of camp or disrupted place. In the United States, it's unprecedented, except in those extreme circumstances. But we don't even have the benefit, if you want to call it that, of a noble purpose that's guiding and focusing us. You know, we went through, there was all kinds of deprivations that went on during, let's just take World War II. But there was a purpose and a mission and a communal sense of us being together and moving toward and making those sacrifices for something and dealing with that stress. Still had stress, still affect people. But that piece is significantly missing right now. It's just scary and it's just overwhelming.
So those times that it's still stressful, but you kind of have a unifying thing with this is what we're angry at.
Yeah, or you're suffering for a purpose. And so it doesn't mean you don't get frustrated, but that larger purpose, that meaning, there being some meaning to what you're undergoing for human beings is a critical thing. It's a critical thing.
When it seems random and
out of our control, and random and out of our control, as opposed to, you know, being involved with war is out of an individual's control, but it's not random. It's defined in a certain way, and it's got a focus. But this is like, we're just stuck. We're just stuck here. And so the kind of things that you deal with managing anger has to do with what the actual source of the origin of that feeling comes from. And so if it's something that you can do something about, then the kind of techniques or strategies that you use are one category of things, as opposed to if it's something you can't do anything else about. And that category of coping mechanisms, as it were, are things that you do something about the thing that's creating that emotional experience. You can act on it. You can change things. You can change yourself in relationship to that, whatever it is. When it's something that's out of your control, then what you have to do is focus on managing the feeling, not being able to relieve yourself or do something that you can actually directly affect what's creating that in the first place. And so there are different kind of coping mechanisms depending on what we're dealing with.
Stacy, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking about the positives of anger. When I'm working with a child, I really try to morph their anger into something that's positive. And working with a child who has a lot of aggression, I was working with a child earlier today, and a lot of the anger that I'm seeing is anger turned inward with children, and being able to co-regulate their anger, meaning letting my calm nervous system to regulate what's happening inside of them in order to figure out what's underneath the anger, and to name that and be able to name what the feeling is underneath it and what the need is and how that child can get the need met. And so that's in working with a kiddo, but even in working with an adult and with myself, I have seen how anger in my own life has propelled me to use that energy in a positive way. So it doesn't always have to be a negative thing, like even Jesus was pissed in the temple. Did I just say pissed?
Yes, you did.
You said it twice.
You said it
Very
at the same time that you said Jesus.
As you can tell.
In the same sentence.
But that's what it was.
Oh, you're in trouble
I
now.
might be in big trouble over that. So
That is an emotion. I mean,
Okay, but he
it-
kicked over tables. Wait a minute, though. He kicked over tables, though, Stacy, and so we got.
well, I think
that's a good question. I mean,
I think in the South, we're taught to be nice at all costs. And there is, I think, a place to be able to be very direct in where you're coming from. And you can do that kindly and with confidence and setting boundaries for yourself of what's okay and not okay for you and with you. And that in a Southern culture, especially for women, I'll just speak for myself, that we're kind of taught to be nice at all costs. And I think there's a place for anger to propel you into a direction that could have been negative, but you can use that same energy and pull yourself into something that you would like to change, or something that you've had enough of it and you're going to do something different now. So those were my thoughts as I'm hearing the three of you chat.
Well, and I think that's important too, because anger is an emotion. I mean, it's just something that we have. And I think a lot of it kind of depends on what we do with it.
Well, it's critical information. The one of the fundamental roles of the emotion system is actually to inform us about our response to things that have varying levels of importance. And so it's a signaling system that something is going on that is related to whatever the particular emotional experience is. And Stacy was talking about, the example she gave was when she's working with a kid, but the kinds of things she was talking about, of course, as she knows, she and John and I know, are applicable to anyone who's experiencing that. What the idea of finding ways to first, you notice what she was talking about in part. She began with saying it was about helping the child, and I'm going to now switch back out of that mode and say it's about making sure that you as a person track and be aware of what's going on internally. And so in order for you to do something about any kind of emotion, positive or negative, it becomes important and useful for you to be aware of yourself and to recognize and acknowledge the emotions that you're feeling. That doesn't mean that you're going to act on them, as Stacy was saying, but it means that there's all kinds of information from that. And also, in order to manage it, you have to be aware of it. And so the idea then is to, as a beginning place, is to just recognize, as I think you were talking, may have been before we came on the screen here, but I think you were talking about that you were noticing that you were being more irritable about stuff. And
Hey now.
And so I mean, maybe it was me. I was one of us, okay? And so
Maybe you were pissed.
So the idea is about, that's really important to start with, is just to know that you need to track what's going on and recognize when it's happening, because then instead of it becoming helpful, it can veer off into being more destructive. You can use it as information, you can use it as energy, you can use it as a guide, but if you are not paying attention to it, and then all of a sudden you're in a screaming argument with your significant other, and it's really about this frustration or the stress or anger about something else, then you've started to impact a significant relationship in a way that's not helpful. And so it's knowing what that emotion set, what the emotions are and what's going on inside of you, that becomes an important piece of this.
If I could add on to that, also knowing what level you're at becomes particularly important when you're dealing with anger. If you're, at an 8 or a 9 or a 10 on your 0 to 10 anger scale, it's often not going to work to just sit down and do a meditation or some breathing or something.
Or to problem solve with the person who's taking you off.
Yes, and I see this a lot with couples in particular. If you're up there at 8 or 9 or 10, you're going to need to call a timeout. And if at all possible, remove yourself from the area temporarily. The people that train me, the Gottmans, suggest, 25 minutes or so. That's what it takes for most people. If you've got two kids, and you're stuck in the car, you're going to have to be creative at that point. You're going to have to roll the window down, chew some gum, find a rest break, find a rest area, get out of the car, something, because if you try to problem solve, it's not going to work. It's going to get worse instead of better. And of course, along the lines of what Stacy was saying about co-regulation, couples can do this for each other. They can teach each other what kind of things to do or say to kind of help lower the temperature before it gets to that breaking point. Sometimes there's certain phrases or actions. Sometimes you can step into someone's personal space and that'll be soothing. And other times you need to stay away at arm's length. And that's the part about, or as I like to call it, the most difficult part of marriage, teaching each other what's helpful. Everybody's got ideas about what's helpful, and it's usually about what works for them, which is not always true for the other person.
So what works for me doesn't work for you?
Somewhat of a perversion of the golden rule there.
Oh, yeah. I had a question that just went out of my head.
I'll speak again around children, if that's helpful. One of the things that I'm seeing in the kids that I'm working with is that when a child's perception is that they're being told what to do from the time their eyes open in the morning till the time that their head hits the pillow at the end of the day. So wake up, brush your teeth, eat breakfast, now start school, now get on your Zoom class or go to class, now put your mask on, now get on the bus, then they get to school and they're being told what to do all day long. Then they get off the bus and then they have to, now I want you to do your homework. When they don't have any margin for play, for creativity, for, just poking around, kids need that. And when their day is overly structured all day long, over time, that can almost be a recipe for anger for children. And then some kids, and then put on top of that, their downtime is video games, or their downtime is YouTube or whatever they're doing on screens, which isn't really downtime. So when that happens over and over and over again over time, that's really kind of a recipe for frustration and anger in children. And so thinking about what does your child need for their perception to be, I have more freedom in my day to kind of ebb and flow with the things that make me feel happy, relaxed, creative, connected, is I spend a lot of time explaining this to parents. And whatever that needs to be for your child. For example, I had one little 3-year-old client that just by allowing that child to not have to get dressed as soon as she woke up, she was able to go downstairs, eat her breakfast in her pajamas and chill out, play like a quick Uno game with dad, and then get dressed, made a huge difference in her day. But when it was, okay, a 3-year-old, you got to wake up, now get dressed, now brush your teeth, now go downstairs. And it was frustrating, this 3-year-old. And I mean, 3-year-olds can make your life a living hell. I mean, they really can. Okay. They will bite you. They will scratch you. They will draw poop on the wall. I mean, they will let you know when they're not happy. So,
except for the poop on the wall, I was thinking, well, teenagers, that and the biting, they tend not to bite. But I think pretty much
Not mine.
pull your hair.
One of them bites.
So, yeah. Anyway,
I think so. Also, that makes me think about the kind of constantness of the scenario that Stacy was talking about brings to mind the times that, as I'm talking with various folks, and they are having these feelings, they're having this kind of sense of basically it's the effect of being under the pandemic and having the isolation and having all the stress and having feeling like they're just kind of sitting there, not being able to move in a meaningful direction. And then they say to me, I don't understand why I'm feeling like this, because this is not typical for me. And so this notion about we're just not used to thinking as human beings, when something occurs internally to us, our natural instinct is to say, there must be something that's a explanation for that about what's going on with me, or what's not happening. But what happens then is you tend to say there must be a reason for that, about some psychological reason. But in this instance, it's not necessarily psychological. It's that this impact of all of the stress, but you're used to looking for something internal. And so they say, what's wrong with me? As opposed to, this is what's going on. And it's understandable that it's going on. But it also means you have to figure out some new things to do, because it's not part of your typical experience. If you're somebody who hasn't had this level of stress, or hasn't had to be confronted with managing this much stress at one time, then it's a whole new thing for you. And it's going to be important to be able to intentionally and planfully and put things in place that are going to do things that help you relax, that are going to do things that help you have address the things that are meaningful, planfully and intentionally do meaningful activities, because they're not just present anymore. Since we're isolated, we don't have the natural experience of running into that, or just kind of moving into those kinds of activities. We have to be more intentional about it. And many of us are not used to doing that. And so we have to think about that and know that that's important.
I think one of y'all said during one of these sessions, I don't remember which one it was, but you said this is happening everywhere. So it's not like we have an escape that, oh, this is frustrating, so I'm going to Florida for 3 months. Okay, that's extreme. But I mean, this is everywhere. And so not having that escape as well, but feeling almost claustrophobic, I guess, or that pressure of this is absolutely everywhere.
Right.
That, coming up with creative ideas for that. How do you find a place to escape?
And I think, again, Wesley, I think it was you who talked about the concept of you getting to the point of saying, look, I'm just over this pandemic. And the thing about that is you can say that all you want, it's not going anywhere. And so with most people, when in their kind of more typical lives, especially if you have a life that has various levels of privilege in it, that you don't have food insecurity, you don't have home insecurity, you have financial insecurity in a large sense or in a consistent sense. You're not, when you would say, I'm over this about something, you could pretty much find a way to be over it and to go do something else. You can't get out from under this until it gets resolved at this kind of societal level. And so you're stuck with this in a way that again leaves us inexperienced about what to do about that. And this is where, Stacy talks, I think, most frequently among the three of us about the critical aspect of paying attention to the body. And so Stacy, say some stuff about the kinds of things that you usually talk about, which is how to kind of pay attention to that and how to have self-care around this issue of recognizing that your body is responding to this.
So so Lisa Dion, who with the Synergetic Play Therapy Institute, inspired me to want to learn more about the nervous system. Because when I was working with children, I could tell that I was picking up on things, but I couldn't quite name what was happening inside of me. And she helped me to realize that, and just quickly, in our nervous system, we have our sympathetic branch that revs us up. We have our parasympathetic branch that calms us down. And the ideal thing is to understand when you're in your window of tolerance and you're not getting so revved up that you're like an audio engineer would say, in the red, like you're not getting so revved up that you're flipping your lid, which is the hand model of the brain, Dan Siegel. If you look up Dan Siegel hand model of the brain, I'll give that link to a lot of parents to understand when you or your child have flipped your lid. Talks about the brain stem and then the amygdala that goes into fight, flight, freeze. And then when you flip your lid, your executive functioning brain is not online, which is why Dr. Fite talks about, taking 25 minutes to walk away from the situation, because your thinking brain is not online. It takes about 25 minutes for you to be able to think straight again. And it's the same way with children, but in co-regulation. As a therapist, I stand in temporarily for that child to help them to help the child to regulate their emotions. And in getting to know that child, I can tell if the child is revved up or if the child is very withdrawn and isolated, which is it's a parasympathetic collapse response in their nervous system. And I'm always asking myself, how can I pull this child into their window of tolerance? Well, the reality is I have to be able to find my own window of tolerance. And as a therapist, sometimes I can get revved up or I can kind of collapse. I'm like, I'm yawning, or I can tell what's going on in the child based on what's happening inside of me. So this whole field of interpersonal neurobiology is really fascinating to start to understand, okay, what is happening inside of me, inside of my own physiology, my own body? How can I regulate myself in order to help regulate the people that are in the room with me? And in working with children, especially really aggressive kids who, are really angry with me, especially when I integrate the 30-day blackout where I've just taken all their screens away. I mean, let's talk about anger for a minute. I mean, they're feeling that. And so I have to do a lot of movement in my office with them to help them to get some of that aggression out and replacing something more pleasurable than what they've been doing and teaching them to regulate their emotions and not just be angry, but what's underneath the anger. Okay, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling alone, I'm feeling betrayed, whatever it is. And then I'm just temporarily standing in for the parent. And then I get to go help the parent to regulate, right? And figure out how I can help the parent. And then the parent and child come into the room together, and all of a sudden they can do a different dance than what they were doing. And so I can't say enough about how important and fascinating it is to understand the nervous system. And if you want to email me, I can send you information about, the sympathetic and parasympathetic and Dr. Dan Siegel and all the things. I don't even know if I answered your question. I don't even know what the question was now. I don't even know. What did I just say?
I just got kind of exhausted with you talking about all the dancing that you were coordinating there. And I thought, okay, now what does Stacy do to be able to like chill after she's like had the child attack her in the therapy session, and then have the parents come in and have them have to be able to dance together. So, but I was thinking about the parallel to that from the family perspective is about thinking as a family member, whether it's part of a couple or part of family, parents with kids, it's about thinking about adding those things into intentionally and planfully into y'all's family routines. So normally we typically don't have the need to have a ongoing kind of set of activities that calm down the nervous system, because for many of us, where we can be lucky enough not to have our nervous systems jacked up all the time. Mm-hmm. But during this period, it means thinking more intentionally about doing things that calm folks down, that brings you together, that this is maybe a non-competitive board game, not where people are like going at each other and that kind of business, but it's also about the things that soothe and comfort for each other. And then there's the individual notion about that, which is the need for you to pay attention to whether you need to be soothed and comforted by music, by time alone, by, taking baths, by taking walks, having the family go out and move together in nature, as Stacy particularly often talks about, because it's so important about its effect on folks. And so this notion about recognizing and appreciating that there's a lot of stress that just sits all the time on us now because of the circumstance, that means we need to be more planful and intentional about regularly, daily, doing some things that bring some calm, that bring some comfort, that bring a nurturing kind of sense for our nervous system, but also our emotions and our relationships. Because that tension and that stress and that frustration also creates that conflict that adds yet another level of stress, that because it's coming naturally from it existing already.
One of the things I would add about relationships is that kind of the metaphor occurred to me. It's like the whole world is in a dysfunctional marriage right now, because one of the things that happens in a dysfunctional marriage is you keep talking, but you can't influence the other person. And you have joint goals. You've pledged yourself to be in this relationship with this person. And so you're kind of stuck if you can't work things out with them. On the other hand, they're stuck too. And so often the solution is listening. Okay. Good compromises depend upon good listening first. That's where the willingness comes from. And of course, pain, because there's pain for most of us when our goals are blocked. That's one kind of operational definition for a big chunk of anger, is feeling that our goals are blocked. And now we're depending a lot more upon the people in our bubble to help us with anger and meeting all of our needs. There's stress on the system. And that's, created all kinds of demands that are really stressing people out. That's why there has been a spike in domestic violence, not just in this country, but in countries around the world, because there's so much pressure on the bubble and so much greater unemployment. and domestic violence always goes up, when there's unemployment. Just a lot of things like that. And so there's a lot of different solutions. It's possible to work together to soothe each other, but sometimes you just got to step away and do that physical thing first before you can even begin to think about having a conversation.
For sure. I think for sure.
John, that makes me think of I've mentioned this several times, and it's still the truth. I have 3 boys, 2 teenagers and 1 preteen. And there'll be times that I go downstairs and the 2 teenagers are rolling around on the ground beating up each other. It's lots of fun. But because of that, we went and it's over, it's because they've started arguing about something. But I went and got a punching bag. So there's a punching bag in our basement. And when they do that, it's like, okay, y'all need to step away from each other. One of you go in there and punch on the punching bag till you're done. Get all of that emotion, that aggression out. Tag your it, you leave, the next one comes in, does whatever. And then you can sit down and have that conversation. So when you're talking about, you've got to do that physical separating. I wonder if, the things that I have seen have been deal with that emotion, that raw, so that you can get that emotion out of the way so that you can think about it and think through it. And then, Jim, as you were saying, figure out what you are mad about. What is it that's underneath that raw emotion that you think you need to punch your brother?
I will say for me that, unlike you, anger is my go-to, and my husband knows that. Stop laughing. No, really.
No, Stacy.
My husband,
Run, everybody run.
after 22 years, he can handle it now, but he knows that I have. And so here's what I have found, and this is what works for me, is a meditation practice twice a day and a daily walk in nature will pull me down from, John talks about, is your anger on a scale of 0 to 10? If it's a 10, it's not good. I don't fly off the handle like I used to, because I have taken it very seriously that I need a twice daily meditation practice and a daily walk in nature. And I cannot tell you how much it has literally changed my life and really my marriage, because I used to well, first of all, I'm kind of a dramatic person anyways. Can you tell? But I used to think meditation was really woo-woo. I used to think what are you talking about? And I couldn't quite figure it out until I downloaded the 10% Happier app and started meditating with a man named Joseph Goldstein. The man is my best friend. I mean, I'm telling you, he is the voice of God. And whenever I hear him in my head saying, may you live at ease. May you be happy. I mean, all the things he says, I can just hear it in my head. And so to have some sort of meditation teacher that's in your head, for those of us that do have a little bit, I don't have an anger problem. It's my go-to.
A naturally intense person.
I'm a naturally intense. Yes, I am. It just brings me down about four notches. And I have found with many of the mothers that I work with that are of my profile, that a twice daily meditation practice is it's like a magic thing. John, what do you have to say about that?
Well, one thing I would say is that observation I've offered before is just universally the people that I see in therapy that spend the most time outdoors do the best. And I think it's not only because of the exercise, that comes, but it's that change of perspective. When you walk outside of the house and the virtual electronic environment and all of those things, you get a different sense, a sense of the seasons changing, a sense of the community around you, and not just the community of people, but the whole community of living things. That's kind of a spiritual thing, to feel part of something that's bigger than
Bigger
you.
than you.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And I think both of those answered one of the questions that we had here. It was, I try to practice removing myself from the physical space where I experience anger in order to process my emotions. How can I do that when working and living in the same space with fewer outlets available? So I think y'all kind of hit on two of those. Are there other ones that you want to include with that?
Bathroom.
Wait, going to the bathroom, John? What
The
are you
roof. Sit on the roof.
being regular Metamucil, baby.
Running away from everybody
That'll
and
help with
hiding.
stress.
You know,
Hiding.
yeah,
At my age,
That's that
Stacey, you don't need that.
research says for women, the favorite room in the house is the bathroom, and for men, it's the garage. Now, they're stereotypes, or the basement. You know? But you need some place to go. And if nothing else, after what I just said a minute ago, you can hit the door and walk outside.
Right, as in open it, not as in punch it.
Right, not as in punching bag.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's another question. How can I respond with grace? There's a good one. Instead of anger, if others don't practice masking or social distancing like I do. So we can either do it with masking and social distancing, or how do we respond to anger in general with grace?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're talking about, what kind of anger you're talking about. You know, if it's safe, I would say that you want to prepare yourself and prepare the other person if at all possible. You know, for example, with couples, you know, we talk about, you know, there's some subjects that come up over and over again that routinely trigger strong feelings. The Gottmans call those gridlocked areas of your marriage. And it's always the best thing to say, hey, how would it be if we talked about X? You know, rather than just blindsiding the person. That's not going to go well. Now, out in public with a stranger, I have many of my clients who work retail. So I've heard many of these kind of discussions, and they often don't go well because people are on the defense. They're waiting for that discussion to happen, you know. And it's often the same people over and over again, you know. And so you got to prepare yourself, keep your physical distance, you know, keep your voice smooth, you know, your tone soothing, but you eventually have to get to boundaries if it's out in public, you know. I'll turn it over to the other folks, see what they've got to say.
I was thinking with regard to out in public there, and it depends if you're at your workplace and somebody approaches you, or the interaction occurs with a customer, or in that kind of setting, you have more limitations about what you can do in terms of removing yourself from the situation if that's your role. And then if you're out in the street, then you've got the difference between somebody being angry in some way that you have to interact with, as opposed to being potentially dangerous. You know, that's what's gotten so confusing about all the different levels of anger, about things like social distancing and mask wearing, and how that's got all of the other implications that got brought to bear about that. But going back to the situation itself, is that sometimes how I think about that is whether you're going to accept their invitation. Somebody being mad at you, well, for Stacey, and now I'm going to have to own up to it, I also am a more intense person, as you might have imagined. But that the question is whether you're going to accept their invitation to get into an argument with them. Now, maybe for you, Wesley, who doesn't have this kind of anger response as a frontline immediate thing, there's a whole nother thing. It may be worth us talking about what happens when you're not really kind of good or used to doing that kind of business. But the question for me is, okay, they're coming at me, and my system, this is part of where the combination of both my interpretive system, but also my physiological system, you know, the adrenaline flushes, And so I have to say, okay, am I going to accept the invitation to engage with this person or not? And that's a question that kind of frames it, because if you say no, then it doesn't matter what they're saying or doing. The times that it becomes a problem when you're interacting, especially with somebody who's angry or accusatory or blaming, is if you accept what they're characterizing and think you need to do something about it. If, on the other hand, you say in your mind, then you're going to respond differently to them. You're not going to be confrontational. You can still set your boundaries about what you will do and not do, but not in a way that's engaging in a reciprocal, angry, confrontational interaction. And then there are skill sets that go along with that too. And there's a number of books. One's on the resource page that we've got, there's a number of books about how to deal with anger and how to kind of confront people. And probably what we'll need to do is add some assertiveness stuff, because that really fits in the area of being assertive when you're talking about running to people out in the real world, so to speak.
If I could offer something also from the Braver Angels folks that, kind of do a lot of these workshops on red blues, talking across political divides and stuff. They emphasize focusing your awareness on the humanity of the other person and on your own humility. The Gottmans, the couples therapy people that train me, would think about the thing that you're critical of with the other person, maybe their inconsideration, their selfishness, and ask yourself, okay, am I selfish? Am I inconsiderate? Or conversely, thinking about something you're proud of about yourself and think, how might this other person have some of those traits too? That can usually help kind of shrink some of this.
Right. And of course, for the Christians among us, there's also he who is without sin. There's also, the problem is, what would Jesus do is, it's often, to me, being the kind of person I am, unsatisfying. And so it's a whole lot of work for me to actually be a humble and kind and compassionate person. And so but that's just me.
I'll just add that, the question is, how do you infuse grace into a response? And the serenity prayer can be really helpful for folks. And that's just, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think there's another one of, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the things I cannot change, the masks I cannot change. You can kind of like add what you need to add in there to allow yourself to kind of detach with love a little bit and focus on what you can change and what you can't.
My old sponsor from AA always had one, Stacy. What he always used to say was, remember, some people you meet in this life, you're not going to warm up to them even if you were cremated with them.
Oh my goodness,
That's hilarious.
that's funny.
That's hilarious.
That's very funny.
Wesley, do you, since you shared that anger is kind of not your go-to thing, how is it that you can tell when that's going on? There may be things that's worth us talking about, but what's the question? If you're a person who's not familiar, who doesn't typically have a strong anger reaction, it can be the case, or if you've been taught or trained or led to feel that anger is not legitimate, that can also be the case. How do you first just recognize that it's anger? What does it look like that's different from a straightforward kind of angry, aggressive feeling action?
You mean like for me or coming at me?
That's the open question. I'm just curious about it for you because, of course, I wanted to have you talk about personal aspects of your life in a public forum here. So,
obviously, I'm all about that.
He's basically asking you, what is it like to not feel That's what we want to know.
Well, I mean, I
How
really
is that
do
possible?
I really do these because y'all are my therapist. That's just what I really do. That's what I really wanted this for. No, that's actually kind of funny that you brought that up because I was just about to say this last question, and I'll kind of put in some of that stuff too. The last question was how to begin identifying anger in yourself if your anger repressed.
Right.
I don't know. I notice a difference in myself. As we talk about self-awareness, that's really what I notice about myself is when I get to a point where I am, and a lot of times it does happen with my kids, or when I don't feel heard. That's when it comes out for me.
Mhm.
And I will say something one time and I will explain it. And this is with pretty much anybody. But it's repeated. We're at this thing again. We're having this conversation again. I don't feel heard.
But you know, in those kinds of situations, when it's not legitimate, for whatever reason you come to feel it's not legitimate to be angry, or you're not comfortable with anger, or it may not be as obvious to you, any of those kinds of things. One of the things that can happen is that when you get angry at somebody else, you can then start basically saying, what is the problem with you? You can turn it and start saying, I must not have been clear, or why do I deserve this? There's an aspect of, and so one of the signals may be if somebody does something that is intrusive in some kind of boundary aspect, either physical or psychological or emotional, and you start saying, what's wrong with me that I'm upset about that? Okay, that would be a classic thing. And so often what that will mean is that something's happened that legitimizes you being upset. So your first step may be actually looking for it having been turned toward you. People who are, sometimes the way to describe people who are naturally nice. And so Wesley, that's you, and Stacy, that's not you. Because it's not me either. John, you're kind of in between. And so, but people who are naturally nice tend to think, what can I do? What did I do? What should I do? People who are not nice like me say, what do they need to do? And how should they do it? And so, but that notion about finding that you're starting to blame yourself, or you're starting to put the responsibility on yourself, may be a signal. Sometimes it could be true, but it's worth using that as a signal to say, wait a minute, maybe it's triggered me. In order to not have to confront them, I have to make it something about me. And that could be one of the signs for people when it starts to get kind of tangled around inside of us as human beings.
A compass I would use also is kind of the idea of how can I get back to happy? You know, what stands in the way of me getting back there? And that may take a little bit reflection. You may have to ask yourself, what would Jim do? Or what would Stacy do?
No, this is a terrible thing to do, John.
No, that's what John would do.
No, not what would Jim do. What would Jim recommend? What would Jim recommend? Jim recommends all kinds of stuff. That doesn't mean Jim can do it, okay? So, oh, good Lord, that would be a disaster.
And to make it even more complicated, you can have feelings about feelings. You can be angry that you're sad.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's a real melody of emotions that are swirling around in there, and they're all information, all good. One of the things I wanted to mention is it helps with adults to motivate them for this whole area, particularly about anger. And you know, there's a lot of research about, you know, being angry a lot of the time is not good for our health. You know, it hurts our hearts. It makes us more likely to get diabetes, obesity, to abuse all kinds of substances. And of course, it's just, for a lot of us, if it lingers, turns into resentment, it's just a flat out waste of time. Yeah. You don't get that time back.
It's unpleasant.
So, yeah.
That is very well appreciated. That's a great reminder for me. Send me a bill for that. By
Oh man, does that mean I have to send Oh. Am I getting 3 bills for all of you? All right, well, we're almost out of time. Do y'all have anything else that you want that we didn't get a chance to kind of cover that you feel is important for us to say before we sign off for this month?
I just want to say, go easy on yourself. We're all doing the best we can.
I'm with you on that one, Stacy. I think that's beautiful.
Amen. Amen.
It's hard to follow something with that. That's
Just say something else unprecedented.
Right. Do you have any personal anecdotes you want to share?
no, you'll have to come back next month for those.
Well, Davis will be here then, correct?
Yes, yes, I hope so. We need to stop having topics because my life tends to kind of go around the topics, and I'm like, wait. I don't want to go back to those topics.
Well, I have to say the other thing I have to say is that after you were talking last time about jogging for 5 miles, this whole month I keep thinking I've got to go out and run. I've got to go out and run just because of you, and it's been miserable. Okay, it's miserable.
Well, I was out there this morning. You could have come and joined me.
See, don't even talk to me about it. I don't even.
That would make you angry. We don't want to make you angry.
Not to do all of my stuff.
Yes. All right. Well, we're glad that everybody joined us. We hope you've learned some things out of this. If you do have questions, please make sure that you get in touch with us. There still is that ask a question thing. Also on our website, BUMC.net, Resiliency and Hope. And there are the links to the counselors on there. There's also going to be, or there is a thing for additional resources. So if you do have questions, if you do need to get in touch with one of us, please reach out. You don't have to do this by yourself. As Stacy said, go easy on yourselves. Give yourselves a lot of grace. So we'll see y'all next week. Thanks for being here.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.